Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So this week's release is going to be a watercolor, and it is a watercolor I did a little while ago, and it is called the Aurora Polar Bear watercolor. So I have the original and also prints of this piece in my shop at creaturesofnat.com. My patrons will get early access to the original, so if they already haven't snapped it up, you can find it in my shop, and if you would like to get early access to any of my work, you can get it for as little as $2 on my Patreon, and the link will be down below, and you get a whole lot of other perks for the tiers that go up as well. So I've got quite a few different videos up at the moment that you'll get access to for $10 and above, $5 and above, I'm sorry, and you'll get access to a whole lot of tips and tutorials for art dolls, as well as all the other things. So check it out if you're interested in something like that. But anyway, let's move on with the watercolor. So I'm using Archer's watercolored paper. It's 185 GSM and it is a medium texture. I quite like the rougher texture of medium watercolor papers. I don't really like the rough texture, which is more of a mottled sort of texture, but I really do prefer just a slight texture, and I'm not the biggest fan of the smooth either. I mean, they're both great, but for me personally, I quite like a little bit of texture, and I found the Archer's 185 medium is probably my favourite. It is a little bit more on the pricier side than your watercolour paper that you can get from little craft stores, but I get mine from a local art store here, Melbourne Artist Supplies, if you're in Melbourne, Australia, and they have it pretty cheap as well, but just have a look online, you might be able to find something a bit cheaper as well. And the paints that I'm using are koi watercolours from the brand Sakura, and they're a Japanese watercolour brand, and I really like these watercolours. They work really well, they dilute really well in the water, and they're very smooth, so there's no like high pigmentation that you can get in bottled watercolours. So I'll probably continue using this brand because I really like it. Winsor & Newton is also a really good brand to use as well. In terms of brushes, I really like using, well, I tend to just go for synthetic brushes. I don't know where sable brushes come from, or how they collect their fur, so I tend to opt for just synthetic ones. They're also a lot cheaper as well, so if you're learning like me, then yeah, I tend to go for the cheaper brushes, and I have just a couple of selections of sizes that I use. I'm still trying out a lot of different brushes and what works for me, so I'm still very much learning how to use watercolors, and you know, the consistencies and how much you need on the brush and the sizes of the brush that create different textures. So very much still learning, but and happy to try different things. So I have one quite big thick brush that I use for mainly bigger areas that I want to cover, or something that I want with a more wet texture, and then I have the brush that I'm using now, which is like a medium-sized brush with a point on it, and this one is a little bit more expensive, this particular brush. I have no idea where it came from, but I find this brush to be really great. And then I have another two brushes, which I don't think they're actually fantastic watercolor brushes, but I find that they work really well for watercolors, so I just use them anyway, and they're the main ones that I actually use for this. Now, the way I paint watercolors is I tend to build up colors, which I know that's not your typical way of using watercolors, but like I said, I am still learning, and I like vibrant colours rather than your dull sort of colours, but I found it to be really good in terms of learning some discipline and learning when to stop and when to leave it, because if you overwork watercolours, I found that it just ends up turning into somewhat of a mess, and the fluidity doesn't really work as well when you've overworked the watercolours, so it's always really good to just practice some discipline and know when to stop. And with this particular watercolour, with the polar bear itself, because polar bears are white, I kind of didn't know how to portray white without actually putting white on it. So I tried to stop putting a whole lot of watercolour or a whole lot of textures and colours on the face and just really do really minuscule bits of outlines that would portray a polar bear's face. And I'd really like to do more paintings like this where I have an animal and sort of like a landscape. I really enjoy doing it. So if you have any suggestions of animals that you'd like me to paint, leave it in the comments down below, and I would love to give it a go. Like I said, I am still learning, so yeah, any sort of challenges would be good, and different animals as well. So this will be my final build-up of colour on this one. I just wanted the Aurora to be a little bit greener, so I added just a little bit darker green into it just to bring out some textures, and I quickly dried off with a small heat gun just to speed up the process a little bit, instead of waiting around for an hour for it to dry. Yeah, a little heat gun or a little hairdryer works really, really well to dry your paint. And I always intend to draw some fur texture or paint some fur texture on, but when I've done so in the past, I have never really been happy with the way it turns out. I think I have to like apply some more discipline to the fur because I get really impatient, which I think that's my downfall with painting fur textures. I just end up not liking the way it looks. So something I'll definitely give a try in the future, definitely. Right, now that the painting is finished, once it's dry, or give it a quick over with the heat gun, I apply some stars to my galaxy painting. So to do this, I use a Liquitex white ink, and I apply it to just a toothbrush, and then I start flicking some star details into the painting. You can cover the rest of it with just like a towel or something, but I tend to just do it on this one. If it's a dark galaxy, I tend to cover things, but for this I just went I went ham on it. So I found this Liquitex works really well for stars as well. You could also use a white uniball pen, but I like the texture of the stars to be different, and I found flicking works really well because you get different sizes, whereas the uniball pen it's kind of looks all the same. So like I said at the start, this original and prints will be available in my store at creaturesofnat.com. If you want to join my Patreon, it'll be in the links down below, and thank you to all my patrons that support me. I really do appreciate it, and I hope you like my content. In the meantime, you can also check me out on Instagram and Facebook at Creatures of Nat, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!